If lately you viewed me with beard and visage grim, my hair unkept, my breeches frayed, my optics grey and dim, 'tis true, I strike my errant breast, but now in sober black I stroll the streets, my friends to greet, the printers on the tack. Yes, let the news be noised abroad in street, in roar and croon. Let word of my deliverance reach satellites and moon. Since 1880 we've been here with posters white and black. I print these posters once again, for Bob is on the tack.
Tim Enright, who had a very, very close association with the Blasket Islands, and believe it or not, I never knew about that association until last January when John Coulihan wrote me a letter. But Tim was a very, very close friend of George Thompson, who wrote this book here, Island Home, which I have for many, many years, which is described as one of the most definitive accounts on the Blasket Islands. And in the introduction to this book, George Thompson himself says, "My thanks are due to Mr. Tim Enright, without whose help and encouragement this book could not have been written." And at the end of the book, there's a memoir on George Thompson himself, written by Tim Enright, which is regarded as one of the best descriptions of George Thompson's own life. Tim was an Irish classical scholar, he was a socialist campaigner, he was a school teacher, and he translated many of the works from the Blasket Islands. And of course he joins many of the distinguished group of translators and interpreters who have brought the Blasket Islands and its life and its native literature not only to the attention of Ireland but to the world. And we have people like Mary Llewellyn Davis, Brian McMahon, George Thompson himself, of course, Robin Flower and Seamus Ennis. And Tim is included in that. I suppose one of his two of his most notable translations, I think, are Olagar na Hínse and also the works of Micheál O'Gaheen. Now, Tim's father was a member of the British Army, but at the time of the Black and Tans War, like many other people, he took up the Republican side. And indeed, Tim's own uncle, Daniel, was executed in Drumbo, County Donegal in 1923. And with that background, it's not surprising that Tim grew up with very, very strong Republican feelings. And indeed, he joined the local Republican Boy Scouts, and he never deviated from his Republican ideals throughout his life. He admired greatly the work of James Connolly, and indeed, when in St. Michael's College, influenced his fellow students there, and was reprimanded as such, not only reprimanded, but given a choice, either to sign a declaration that he would desist from such consultations with his students or forego the going of doing his Leaving Cert. And he opted for the latter, so he never did his Leaving Cert. So he went turf cutting on a bog, but continues his studies and matriculated and graduated eventually from Trinity College with a degree in Celtic Studies. Incidentally, one of his great friends there that he kept up communication with all his life was Ristard O'Glashna. While there, he joined the Common Gaelic in Trinity College and took frequent trips back to the Gaeltacht, where he learned his Irish, loved music, and learned to play the tin whistle. And Sean O'Lewing, writing about Tim and his background at that time, said, "His native North Kerry nurtured writers like his teacher Brian McMahon and Maurice Welsh, storytellers."
In comparison, say, to the, as was mentioned earlier, the eccentrics in Church Street. But the streets here also had characters. And I'm talking about the time, the 1940s and the 1950s, generally the war years, if you like. So our world was very local. There was one advantage as children we had. We could play on the streets. The streets were our playground, if you like. And But the characters in Charles Street here would liven up the grey days of the war with impromptu musical sessions, like a parade around the town on New Year's Eve, which had been almost as spontaneous, with voluntary musicians having acquired maybe instruments from a brass band from the previous generation, my grandfather's generation. The town had a brass band, and the instruments were lying idle there in the band room, was called the band room, and they were acquired anyway, or borrowed by some of these people. One of the leaders would have been Bunny Dalton, who lived there in Charles Street. We had Plucky Maloney, who was the percussionist, and even though he had poor eyesight, he banged that drum with great joy around the town on New Year's Eve. Now, the other part of the town was at the rear of the streets, between the back of Courthouse Road, which is just here, and Willem Street. It was like what they call in the States a block. In the rear of those houses were about workshops. There must have been at least a half a dozen, and that's what I'm trying to capture in a short poem here that I have. Okay, and the poem is called Simply Enough. Sorry.
My aunt's house, Mamie O'Connor, whose anniversary was just last Wednesday, where my grandmother was waiting for us, and then we came down to 8 Courthouse Road. And Courthouse Road was a wonderful road. I don't know whether I would call the people on it eccentrics or unusual or usual, but there was a wonderful combination. Right here at the corner at the top lived Timmy Connor. And I remember Timmy Connor and his friends Micheál Súleabháin and Pat Dunn, and the three of them as they used to walk around and down the woods. Three extraordinary people, and I was talking to Jimmy McMahon last night, who shared some wonderful insights into all three. And then next door to me was Garth MacDonald and his wonderful wife, daughter Catherine, who was best friends of Annie Mae Glavin, who's here with us, and Paddy. And in the house below us was Mr. and Mrs. Clancy. And after they died, Miss Fahy, who lived in the post office, about whom we could tell many stories, lived there. Across the road from us were two, I will say, I won't say unusual, but let's say special ladies, Maudie and Birdie Collins. And to the right-hand side of them, as I faced across, was the Glavin household. A household that I used to love visiting. A house full of atmosphere, full of warmth, full of wonderful people, because people used to stay in that particular house. And I was particularly fond of Mrs. Glavin, Paddy's mother, that I used to do messages for. But let me hasten to add, as I was trying to explain to Paddy, that maybe wasn't done out of maybe neighbourly love or anything else, but she had the great habit of putting, I remember, her fingers into her small little purse and giving me a penny or two when I would do the messages for her. But a wonderful one. Above them was Tommy Hannon, a man who was so involved in the GAA for years and years, and above that again Tim Graney and Mrs. Graney, who was a dressmaker. So we had the full spectrum there. We came to Listowel, and my father, who was already writing short stories, befriended Brian McMahon in particular, Cara Nagallard.
Mates went for a swim in the river. He went in at a place called the Pauline, between the big bridge and the castle. He drowned there. His name was Gabriel Cummins. He was 14. He was an only child. Gabriel was a Dublin boy who spent the summer holidays with his aunt in that building where John Brazel has his office today. Gabriel lies above in the graveyard with his parents. These stanzas resulted from that tragedy. Between high shelving banks, the river here seems hardly to move at all. So fresh, so cool, inviting, the water seems, so soft, so clear. It is a treacherous, accursed pool. Once to this place a playmate came to swim, a boy of 14 years. Here he died. He left to us who still remember him the salt of tears that never will be dried.
And the deaths in the workhouses from Kay earlier. So she was born literally a year or so after the end of the famine. It really brings us back a long way. She married a man called Daniel O'Connor, father of Joseph, and he and his family were evicted from a farm on Knockmuel near Dua in 1863. And he walked, barefoot probably, from there into Tralee. And he had, I don't know whether it was good fortune or bad fortune, probably good fortune in the circumstances, to meet a recruiting sergeant. And he ended up in the Lincolnshire Regiment. And my grandfather says in the book that his father said that there wasn't a country in the world coloured red as part of the British Empire that he hadn't served in. And I've since looked at his military record, and he was in Yokohama in 1869 and the Strait Settlement of Malaysia the previous year. So you can imagine for a boy from Dua to end up in Yokohama and Malaysia and Cape Horn and places like that. It was really quite amazing. So Daniel got as far as the rank of recruiting sergeant major in the Lincolns, and then there was a class bar after that. You couldn't be promoted any further unless you came of different stock. So Daniel and Elizabeth Wilmot, his wife, decided to bring the family, which was a sizable one. He was the eldest of a family of 11. So he decided to bring them back to Listowel. And the piece I'm going to read is just as the very large family arrive into Listowel and what happened next.
Remember so well. Wonderful woman. And incidentally, when we'd be passing down the street here, she'd often be standing there at the door with a cigarette in her hand. She'd never say hello. She'd say, up the store. And it's also, of course, about a lovely piece in it about Sal's mother as well. That first Writers' Week by Sal Kelly. The time, early 70s, and I had arrived from Dublin for the weekend. I was sitting in the cane chair outside my mother's counter. Like her mother before her, she was a milliner, and I was watching as she worked. From the way she was oiling the needle, prodding it through the roots of her hair, I could see that she was agitated. She was at that critical juncture where craft aspires to art, where the needle wriggles and slips like a silver eel through the slithery layers of muslin or silk or lace in an effort to define the elusive notion of flair defined by grace. But the woman was agitated by economic concerns as well. The 60s had not been good for business. Bad enough that Carnaby Street had committed a sin against the Sixth Commandment by introducing the Mini, an item of apparel that would definitely give rise to impure thoughts, which were the rage all the time. But on top of that, Mary Quant had committed what amounted to one of the 7 deadly sins by dispensing with the hat. To top it all, God-fearing milliners had been abandoned by the church in their hour of need. It was no longer de rigueur to wear a hat at Mass or any other religious occasion.
And it reminded me of the cartoon that was in the Dublin Opinion, which was, I swear, the first satirical magazine in these islands. But anyway, it's about 2 fellas coming out of the Queen's Theatre, and they're after seeing Long Day's Journey Into Night by Eugene O'Neill, and it's on a poster at the back. And the full version of Long Day's Journey Into Night is 4.5 hours long. And the 2 of them are coming out, and one of them has a beard, and he turns to the other and says, I swear I shaved before I went in. And Vincent had mentioned was from Church Street in Listowel. And he wrote a book. I won't detain you, certainly not anymore. He wrote a book, one of many books, but and plays that he wrote. But this is The Splendid Pretense. And without a doubt, I read it again just because I was coming back to do this. And without a doubt, he mentions a town called Listowel. And without a doubt, it's Listowel he's talking about. And I think it's very reflective on what my father, his feelings and the way he lived his life, of which be happy to say I was part of, and my family. Anyway, it's just a short section from The Splendid Pretense. Jim lit his pipe and looked out over the fields from his seat on the crest of Ballygallagh Hill. Those fields contained his world, the world of Listowel, his mother's home, the river, the woods that marched along its bank.
Foreign field. In his 1983 book, The Road to Song, Sean McCarthy wrote, "This was a time when fatherless children were treated not too kindly in this land. She died of shame, leaving her baby behind. The priest in Listowel, may God forgive him, refused to let her body lie in the church overnight. But the people of Listowel rallied around and soon put that to right. The streets of the town were jammed for her funeral the next day. Her child did not suffer for want of love. She is loved and will be loved while there is one of her kin around. I give you Frank."